Good morning once again. So, our subtopic today is transformation. And what I mean by that is the actual critical point. When did Jacob become Israel? Can we identify a point that says it happened then? We all have birthdays, natural birthdays. Many of us have baptismal days, where the date, and it's locked to a certain date. Is there a particular moment in time that we can say, that's it? That's when Jacob became Israel? And to some extent, no. But to some extent, it certainly happened for the first time at a particular point. And that's a very interesting point. Let's jump right in. Jacob is wrestling with an angel. He was left alone and wrestled with the man until daybreak. Then the angel said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and men and have overcome." Turns out that's the least direct quote we'll ever meet. There's so much to unpack in there. And one might say, there you are. Jacob becomes Israel. God himself, via the angel, says so. No more Jacob, now you're Israel. And if it were that simple, we could go to lunch. But bad news, David and others, is that actually true? Does Jacob become Israel at that point? Who am I to question it? I'm not questioning it, I'm just reading. Because the next sentence says, Jacob said, "Please tell me your name," etc., etc. Jacob called this place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, my life was spared." So God seems to say, "No more will I call you Jacob, I will now call you Israel," and then promptly calls him Jacob, repeatedly. So the angel was wrong? It's very curious. Let me explain what we're looking at here. This is the way I decided to investigate that. I thought what might be nice is to investigate every use in Genesis of the name Jacob and the name Israel. I want to know, what's God doing if Jacob doesn't suddenly become Israel? So look at now some of you will have figured out what you're seeing already. These are the chapter numbers in Genesis. Now I realize the chapter numbers are introduced by humans, not by God's own direct hand, but at the same time, the stories in Genesis are quite modular, so that the chapter breaks are in quite sensible places, setting up certain stories. And what I've done is every time Jacob is called Jacob, I've used an indicator of blue, and every time he's called Israel, I've used green. And then all these bars are the same height, because I've just scaled them all to be 100%, so they're percentage. So in Genesis 25, where Jacob is born, 100% of the time he's called Jacob, and so forth as we go through. Some chapter numbers don't exist. You'll see there's a jump here, for example, between chapter 37 and chapter 42. I'm not cheating or cherry picking. The man Jacob or Israel doesn't appear in the chapters in between. Chapter 38 is about Judah and Tamar. Chapter 39 is about Joseph and Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife. And chapters 41 and 42 are also about Joseph. So these are all the chapters that contain Jacob or Israel. And here in chapter 32 is where we were with the angel. And this is where God says, "No more will I call you Jacob, I'll call you Israel." And then he doesn't. Curious. And if you can't make out what's on that tiny little slide up on the screen in front of you, I've made these completely massive posters that you can look at any point, and you can see where we're going as we come into Jacob and Israel. And what you see is, basically, there's no time at which Jacob, the blue, completely goes away, and Israel, the green, completely comes in. There's no binary transition whatsoever. Or rather, there's a series of transitions as Jacob becomes Israel and then collapses back to being Jacob. And suddenly I realize, oh, we've got something very beautiful here. You can buy study Bibles. And in the margins and in the columns beneath, it'll tell you some guys tries to exposit to you what the Bible is saying. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're off base, hard to know what's what. But if this is true, that Jacob is the former man and Israel is kind of like the baptized man, this then says we have God's own commentary on the rest of the book of Genesis, that whenever we hit the word Jacob, we can say that God's seeing Jacob as a man who's like, not necessarily sinning, but at least not rising to his full spiritual potential. And wherever we see God calling him Israel, why then, that's when we see he's behaving as a disciple should. Where are we then? Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. That's what the angel says. Apparently, God's angel is wrong, because for the rest of that chapter and the entirety of the next 2 chapters, he is nothing but Jacob. But then, of course, we know the narrator or the author of the book of Genesis is actually God. So this isn't a mistake. This isn't an oversight. It's deliberate. And the moment I see it's deliberate, I'm fascinated, because I know there's something special hidden there. He says, no more Jacob but Israel, then calls him Jacob. That's deliberate. He's doing something. There's a hidden message there, and we need to dig out what it is. And perhaps one of the ways we can help solve that problem is to say, well, we've seen this happen before in the Bible. Bathsheba gave birth to a son, and they, that's her and David, named him Solomon, meaning peace. The Lord loved him. And because the Lord loved him, he sent word through Nathan the prophet to name him Jedidiah. And there's a use of the word name Jedidiah in Scripture. How many other times in Scripture does the name Jedidiah appear? Correct answer, all of you? Silence. None. Solomon was never Jedidiah. And you see what's being said. I, God, have called you to be my beloved son of Yah. And from then on, he's called Solomon and nothing else. We don't have a book in the Bible called Jedidiah's Song of Songs. It doesn't exist. It's Solomon's Song of Songs. He never made that transition he was called to make. And now we see what's being said. There's a responsibility on the newly named man to make that new name real, to make that new identity authentic. It's not enough to say, I've been baptized, I can prove it, there's a date, there's a photo, whatever. If I've been baptized, there's a responsibility on me to make discipleship authentic and valid and true. It lands on me. And this suggests it never really took up with Solomon. So what then do we see? Now this becomes incredible to me. What I'm looking at is discipleship. It starts, here's God's call. And God says, okay, Jacob, I've had enough of this. It's time for you to be Israel. And Jacob says, not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet, not yet. You know, that's what you do, that's what I do, right? I recognize that. But eventually, he dips his toe in the water and he tries out being Israel. And from there on, he is Israel some of the time. Jacob never fully goes away, and it won't. And that's okay. This is a man whom God accepts. This is a successful discipleship you're looking at. And I can relate to this discipleship because Jacob is always still there. In the very final chapter, Jacob or Israel's death, there's still some Jacob there. What do I see? I see that there are transitions forwards and backwards from Israel to Jacob. It's a struggle. I see that the data is noisy. That makes sense. I live a very noisy discipleship. Sometimes with the wrong sounds, sometimes with the right. Here's an interesting thing that I see. I see perfection. All Israel, beautiful. Is perfection a word that you want to grab hold of and say yes? Don't be afraid of it. We all know we can be perfect for split seconds. It turns out we can be the perfect disciple we're called to be for a progression of time. The only problem is it's not true perfection, otherwise it would last forever. We are, to say it the way I like to say it, we are perfect for very imperfect periods of time. And so's Jacob. So we see perfection in a matter is achievable. And yet after this perfection, there's a fall away, followed by a further fall away, followed by his lowest point for a long time. And I wonder if at this point, Jacob or Israel is looking at himself and saying, I remember those times a while ago. Were they even real? Was I just faking myself? And the answer appears to be no, it was real. And collapses can still happen after big, bold spiritual successes. This is our experience, and it's been encoded in the book of Genesis so carefully and so beautifully, and there's only a small amount of digging required, but digging is required. God always does this. His best lessons are just below the surface, and you don't see them until you dig for them. But one thing perhaps you will see, amongst all this noise, amongst all this clutter and potential chaos and collapse, would you agree with me that you can at least see an upward trend? Is that fair in those green bars that you're looking at? And understand what an upward trend means. You might say, well, if my discipleship is trending upwards, then on my last few days, I must be the most righteous I have ever been. No, it doesn't work that way. Data is noisy. Your most righteous time may have been years ago, and on your dying day, you're only here. But there's still an upward trend, and maybe that's the best we can hope for in life. That by God's grace, we can form an upward trend in being Israel after we have been Jacob. To say it another way, we wear the robes of righteousness so intermittently. Maybe we manage to get them on and they slip off, or we throw them off deliberately quite frequently. But that's what I see. This is one of my favorite discoveries in all Bible study, and I make no apology of saying that. And that's why I've left it here the whole time for you to look at whenever you want to, because that's what I see there, and I think that's what's encoded there. It's a truly beautiful thing. Your name will no longer be Jacob. It will be Israel. So what we'll do is we'll have a little look at the chapters that follow. The angel made this announcement in chapter 32. Here we are in chapter 33. And if you remember, chapter 33 is 100% blue. So Jacob isn't Israel yet. This is when Jacob remained Jacob. And this is the case when he meets Esau. He doesn't behave like Israel. What does he actually do? Jacob looked up, and Esau's approaching with 400 men. He put the female servants and their children in front, and a second company with Leah and her children, and Rachel and Joseph, the ones he actually loved, went in the back. So all he's doing at the moment is just reinforcing what we saw yesterday, how much more he loves Rachel, who was a godless idolater, more than he loved faithful Leah, in whom he was too blind to see any true value. Jacob reinforces his preferential love for Rachel over Leah. In fairness to Jacob, Israel, at least he has built a family, as God might have wanted. Esau, by contrast, seems to have built nothing but an army. There's no mention of a wife or children. He's traveling around the countryside with 400 men, and that, I should imagine, that involves warfare and pillage. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. So he approaches his godless brother and makes obeisance to him. I suggest to you this very much is Jacob. Israel would love Leah. He'd see value in her. If anyone was going to go in the most protected position, it would be Leah. And Israel would not be scared of Esau. Israel would not put such value in the godless older brother. Esau says, "What do you mean by all this procession, these gifts you keep sending me?" "To find favor with you, my lord," Jacob answered. "I have enough, my brother," Esau replied. "Keep what you have." But Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor with you, take this gift. For indeed I have seen your face, and it is like seeing God's face, since you, Esau, have accepted me." So Jacob urged him until he accepted. This is not Israeli behavior. This is Jacob, placing such value in a godless man. "Just let me find favor in the eyes of my Lord." That's a good thing to say. If by my Lord you mean God, if by my Lord you mean Jesus, Jacob means Esau. I suggest that where Jacob seeks Esau's favor and sees Esau's face as God's face, an almost blasphemous move that, I suggest to you Israel would have done neither of those things. And you might say, well, you're being very tough on Jacob here. You're not criticizing Esau hardly at all. And there's a reason for that, because God doesn't criticize Esau either. Is that because Esau is perfect, the better brother? By no means. The answer is a true tragedy. Esau doesn't exist on God's radar screen. As God sweeps around, there's a blip. He sees Jacob. And there's need for correction. There's need for rebuke. There's need for reproof. But Esau isn't even there. So there's no correction for Esau, because God can't see in Esau anything that wants to know him. And so God works with Jacob, just as we study Jacob. The next chapter, we move into Genesis chapter 34. And it's the whole issue with Dinah. Jacob heard that Shechem had defiled his daughter Dinah, but since his sons were out in the fields watching the livestock, Jacob remained silent until they returned. Meanwhile, Shechem's father Hamor came to speak with Jacob. Then Jacob's sons returned from the field. They were deeply grieved and very angry. Now Jacob has said nothing. He's gone not to see the family of the so-called offenders. He's waiting for his sons to come home. There's no doubt that he knew he was waiting for 10, 11 very angry brothers to come back from the fields, and he would stoke their anger. So much is obvious. Hamor says, "You can settle among us. The land is open." But Jacob's sons answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, "We will enter into an agreement with you on one condition only, that you become like us." And by becoming like us, what he means is that they be circumcised. He says, well, that's what makes us righteous, this mark on our bodies, that's what makes us God's children, that we're circumcised. And it doesn't. Whilst God's children might choose to be obedient to his law, and should do, baptism does not convey upon me any righteousness. It's a decision I made because I wanted to be God's child. So when Jacob's sons say, "Become like us," what they're meaning is become circumcised, as we've done in our covenant relationship. But the truth is that isn't going to come out of their mouths, well, we're actually deceitful, dishonorable killers planning your immediate slaughter and genocide by misusing God's law to incapacitate you first. And when you are circumcised and weakened, we will then attack and kill you, which is precisely what they do. But so it's an irony, isn't it, that they say, "Become like us." Whatever you do, don't become like them. They just mean the circumcision. We're circumcised genocidal killers. Become like us. No. Don't. To them, like us just meant circumcised, but actually they were acting as great evil at that time. And they slaughter Shechem and the entire men of the city, and then Jacob's displeased with his sons, as if he had nothing to do with it. "You have brought trouble on me by making me obnoxious to the people living in this land. If they join forces against me and attack me, I and my household will be destroyed." Jacob accepts no responsibility for the slaughter. Jacob is unconcerned over the actual genocide of the men of Shechem. He's not bothered there's all these dead people. What he's saying is, "Your slaughter has greatly inconvenienced me." Dear me, what a reaction. His sons have gone off and destroyed an entire city and slaughtered men that they tricked into becoming incapacitated by circumcision. and Jacob's only concern is for himself. Whose voice do you hear there? Who does that remind you of? This is all very inconvenient for me when I'm guilty of a murder myself. Anyone?
David.
Not David so much. Much further back in Scripture. Don't you hear the voice of Cain? My punishment is more than I can bear. Whoever finds me will kill me. There's quite a similarity between those quotes. You've inconvenienced me. I might be destroyed now. Cain cares nothing for the fact that his brother is dead. Not from what we can see. Cain cares nothing for the family bereavement. And likewise, one thinks this is truly Jacob. This is not Israel. Israel would condemn the slaughter and not leave the guilty unpunished. That's enough of Jacob's failures. That was chapter 33 and chapter 34. The angel had said, no more Jacob, be Israel. And Jacob said, nope, not ready, nope, not ready. But in chapter 35, that is the moment where Jacob becomes Israel. Ask yourself, what is that incident going to be? Because whatever the answer comes to be, you may be surprised. I was surprised, so it's no loss if you're surprised. It wasn't what I expected at all. Let's have a look. Let's jump right in. 35. Jacob said to his family, get rid of all these foreign gods you have with you. Purify yourselves. Change your clothes. Come, let us go up to Bethel, meaning the house of God, of course, where I will build or rebuild an altar to God. Is that going to be a surprise that that's the transition point? For me, that's not a surprise. That's a good transition, flushing out all the idols. However, that isn't it. Not yet. Because after verses 2 and 3, verses 4, 5, 6, so they gave Jacob all the foreign gods, and Jacob buried them under the oak at Shechem, so he'd know where to find them later. No, probably not. And Jacob and all the people came to the house of God. Okay, so disposing of the family idols is not the transition. And I think to myself, okay, it's surely a step in the right direction. But then I think of the words of Jesus, don't just get rid of your bad habits and replace them with nothing, otherwise you'll end up with even worse habits, right? Getting rid of the bad habits isn't enough. There needs to be more. Okay, so there is more. Disposing of the family idols is not the transition, but it does provoke God to repeat the promise. If you're ever wondering, this is where God repeats exactly what the angel told him. Your name is Jacob. You're still Jacob, I notice. But no longer shall you be called Jacob. It's coming, says God. I can see it coming. Israel will be your name. But Jacob, it's on you to make the name change. It's on you to make the character change that makes the name change real. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone. He builds the altar at Bethel, the house of God. So Jacob called the place where God had spoken with him Bethel. Still not yet. Now I'm genuinely surprised. The whole family has purged themselves of the family idols, and they've replaced it with worship to the true God in the house of God at Bethel by building an altar. And it's still not enough. I would have thought that would be enough. I'm wrong. So I keep reading. And then Rachel dies. Rachel began to give birth to Benjamin and had great difficulty. Rachel died and was buried. And Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day that pillar marks Rachel's tomb. Jacob mourns Rachel, and that's fair enough to mourn your wife. It was the wife he should not have chosen, the wife he should not have taken, the wife that was essentially an idol to him. And you realize, so he'd got rid of all the family idols, bar one, the biggest one, Rachel. Rachel died. Jacob set up a memorial pillar And Israel moved on. When the days of mourning for Rachel were done, Israel moved on and pitched his tent beyond the Tower of Eder. Whether you like it or whether you don't, it's not my favorite choice. This is what the Bible tells us. Jacob became Israel when he was ready to let Rachel go. She was dead. Jacob mourned her, but Israel moved on. That, to me, was a tremendous surprise. I did not see that coming. But that's why we spent all of yesterday studying Leah and Rachel, to ensure that we understood the characters of these two women and how Jacob had basically become besotted and become enthralled, enslaved to the wife that he should never have had, who was an idolater. Rachel's death is the transition and is not the transition. The transition is Israel's ability to move on from the person to whom he was enslaved. And this is our exaltation, and it may not be a person for us. There could well be an idol. That person, that business practice, that addiction, that whatever. We Jacobs won't become Israel until it's put to death, and until the days of mourning are done. It's no good putting some evil out of your life if you lament and regret it for every day thereafter. You're still attracted to it. Let it go and move on with God's help. Let's just summarize what we've learned. The destruction of the family's idols left Jacob as Jacob. The rebuilding of God's altar at the house of God left Jacob as Jacob. The death of Rachel, his idol, was the transition point. He's still Jacob while he mourns her, but once he has a new mindset to move on, from then on, God calls him Israel, strength with God. That's what the strength with God was. It wasn't rolling around with an angel who could have killed him with a single touch. It was the strength to move on from the person to whom he had made himself enslaved. The letter of 1 John is all about love. God is love. If you don't love your brother, you can't love God. For he who doesn't love his brother whom he has seen, how can he love God whom he has not seen? You know all these verses. Isn't it funny that that's the closing line of 1 John? Little children, keep yourselves from idols. That's what's in the way of love. That's what's in the way of transition. That's what's in the way of Jacob becoming Israel. And let's just enjoy some of the verses, since I've suggested to you that the Bible is so cleverly and carefully written as transitioning between the names of Jacob and Israel. Let's just enjoy a couple of the transitions that we see, because one of the characters that comes into the plot is Joseph. And for Joseph, you may as well say Jesus. This is obviously not just a type of Christ, he's a truly righteous man. And the clever thing is, when God is writing Genesis, every time Joseph comes into the text, if Jacob has slumped back to being Jacob, he becomes Israel in the presence of Joseph. If you haven't seen it before, look for it. You'll enjoy it. I see it. Jacob lived in the land where his fathers has stayed. We're in Genesis 37, well beyond the initial transition, but somehow Israel has slumped back to being Jacob. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Very next verse. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. So in case you're prompted to think, oh, that's just bad parenting, you mustn't have a favorite. You've got to love them all equally. And there's sense in that, but God's saying, no, this favoritism was of God. Joseph was the godly one, and Jacob became Israel when he saw value in Joseph more than he saw value in his other sons. Israel is born from the love of his godly son. Joseph has come alive in the text. Jacob has become Israel. And the reverse is true. If Joseph departs from the text, Israel collapses back to being Jacob. Maybe you've seen this already, and I'm wasting your time, I hope not. But it's rather lovely, because of course Joseph dies in the mind of Jacob. He didn't die for real, but Jacob honestly thought he did. Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are out in the fields. I'm going to send you to them. And that's the time when Jacob's sons decide to attack Joseph. When he came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe. They took him, threw him in a cistern, and then they, under Judah's direction really, got Joseph's robes, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. Took it back to the father and said, here, have a look at this. I think something may have happened to Joseph. And then Jacob says, it is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, not Israel. Jacob tore his clothes and mourned his son for many days. Israel dies, as it were, when Joseph dies. When Israel believes that Joseph is dead, he does not have the strength to remain Israel anymore. And that's kind of like, I think it's a lovely forelesson. This is about Jesus in your life. When Jesus comes into your life, when you allow him into your life, you, Jacob, become Israel. And when Jesus departs your life, or where you shove him out, then, Israel, you collapse back to being Jacob. And then this is our last slide, really. The righteous will live by faith, because the reverse again is true. Israel loves Joseph. Joseph dies. Israel collapses back to Jacob. But Joseph, if you like, is resurrected, at least in Jacob's mind, because he finds out in the end that Joseph had never died. Joseph had been alive the whole time. The righteous will live by faith. That's a verse we know well. It's cited in at least 3 places in the New Testament. But I see a new energy in that verse now. Not just that the righteous have their lives founded on their faith, which is true, but when faith flares up, life comes with it. The righteous man becomes alive when he's operating in faith. Let me explain that with this lovely verse from the Genesis. First of all, however, these uses in the New Testament, they're all aware that they're quoting from an Old Testament prophet, Habakkuk, who said that first. But what I like to suggest to you is that the first biblical example of the righteous coming alive by faith is actually back here in Genesis 45. Let's look at the verses. So the sons of Jacob went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. Whenever you meet Jacob, Jacob lives in the land of Canaan. Israel lives in the promised land in the presence of God, but Jacob lives in Canaan. They told their father Jacob in the land of Canaan, they told him, Joseph's still alive. In fact, he's ruler of all Egypt. Listen to the words carefully. Jacob did not believe them. The man did not have faith that it was true. And if the man does not have faith, then he's dead. So he's Jacob, the dead man, the mortal man. Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But they pressed on. When they told him everything Joseph had said, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. The spirit of the dead man revived, and Israel said, I believe that son that was dead has come back from the dead. Israel said, I'm convinced. My son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die. How cleverly is that written, that the man Jacob, who did not believe, became Israel, and he did believe. Why? Because the righteous will live by faith. Without faith, he's dead. But when he has the faith that Joseph lives, he becomes alive, and he's Israel. Israel is resurrected when Joseph is resurrected. Our final slide, therefore. When Jacob became Israel, summarize it as best I can. When did Jacob become Israel? It's when he finally flushed out the biggest and most pernicious idol of all. When the idols were gone and the mindset to move on from them was in place, was when Jacob became Israel. And coincident was that is when he had the power to believe that those that were dead can come back to life with the power of God. When he embraced the gospel message, when he embraced the central message of the gospel, that of resurrection, that of life after death, that is when Jacob became Israel, and that is exactly the same for you and I. This isn't a history lesson. This is living doctrine today. You and I will transform from Jacob to Israel when the idols are gone, the mindset's there to move on, and the gospel of resurrection is embraced. And we were taught that first of all in the very first book of the Bible. Thank you, Guy.